The city operated on a predictable grid in southwest Missouri. On Sunday morning, Joplin followed its usual weekend rhythm: church traffic, grocery runs, scattered activity along Range Line Road, and preparations for evening graduation ceremonies. Residential blocks held steady patterns: roughly 25 people per acre, quiet streets, lawn maintenance, light vehicle movement. Utility systems functioned within standard parameters. Power distribution remained stable. Water pressure held uniform across sectors. Communications networks carried their usual Sunday load. Nothing in the city's structural behavior suggested that its systems would soon be pushed beyond design limits. Surface conditions reflected late May norms: elevated moisture, dew points in the upper 60s, temperatures rising through the mid-70s by late morning. A warm front had moved northward overnight, but carried no visible signals that distinguished the day from any other spring weekend. Traffic flowed cleanly through commercial corridors. Drainage infrastructure handled residual rainfall without effort. Stormwater systems calibrated decades earlier performed exactly as expected. In the regional monitoring network, however, the first outlines of instability already existed. The Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk outlook for Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Radar installations in Kansas began detecting convective initiation, cells forming, organizing, moving northeast at 20 to 30 miles per hour. Velocity couplets appeared briefly in scans along the border. Early rotation signatures, 1 to 3 miles in diameter, tightening with each update. But none of that translated yet into surface-level behavior. The city's spatial grid held its shape. Intersections remained clear. Commercial centers filled gradually. Range Line Road moved at weekend capacity. The physical environment gave no outward sign that atmospheric processes aloft had begun altering the framework of the coming day. By early afternoon, subtle transitions presented themselves to those looking for them. Lowering cloud bases to the west, a wind shift from southeast to south, then southwest, barometric pressure declining faster than morning rates. Streetlights in some sectors activated prematurely as the ambient light level dipped under storm-thickening clouds. The acoustic environment changed, the usual daytime noise overlaid by a low-frequency undertone that registered more as pressure than sound. Inside homes, stores, and vehicles, these changes felt incidental, not defining. Watches were routine in spring. Weather patterns like these passed often without consequence. Systems continued normal operation. Emergency staffing remained standard. Communications flowed uninterrupted. The grid, both physical and administrative, held its regular shape. But above that grid, the atmosphere had begun organizing. A supercell tightened as it crossed into Missouri. Radar showed structural integrity increasing, rotation diameter shrinking, velocity differentials rising past 50 miles per hour across the core. The environment that had hovered at the edge of instability all morning now had a mechanism, a mesocyclone capable of producing a violent tornado. And while the data was visible to meteorologists in Springfield, the translation from system awareness to city awareness had not yet occurred. Joplin continued its Sunday unchanged. By late afternoon, the atmosphere over southwest Missouri had completed its transition from potential to structure. The supercell that crossed the Kansas-Missouri border maintained coherent rotation. Radar showed the mesocyclone tightening, its diameter contracting from roughly 3 miles to nearer 2, while velocity differences across the circulation center climbed past 50 miles per hour. Cape values exceeded 4,000 joules per kilogram. Shear profiles matched parameters associated with long-track violent tornadoes. The environment no longer held generic instability. It held a mechanism capable of focused destruction. At lower levels, surface observations recorded the adjustments. Dew points remained in the upper 60s. Temperatures stayed in the mid-70s. Barometric pressure began dropping at accelerated rates, several millibars within 20 minutes. Wind direction at ground level, which had begun from the southeast, completed its gradual shift to south and then southwest. Gusts increased toward 30 miles per hour. To observers west of the city, the sky reorganized. Lower cloud layers formed structured bases, and a wall cloud emerged beneath the main updraft. The acoustic field changed before the city fully saw the storm. Ambient Sunday noise continued. Traffic, HVAC units, distant voices. But an additional low-frequency component entered the soundscape below typical speech range, felt in walls and windows rather than heard. Light levels dropped enough that some streetlights triggered automatically. Visibility in western sectors declined as the storm's forward flank advanced, bringing heavier rain and thickening cloud cover. Radar reflectivity began to show a hook echo on the southwestern side of the precipitation core, a pendant-shaped feature that indicated intense, focused rotation. Velocity products confirmed a strong couplet. Inbound and outbound winds tightly adjacent, sharpening with each scan. Within that circulation, the first debris signature appeared, a cluster of high reflectivity at low levels, inconsistent with precipitation alone. That signature marked the moment the rotation had found the ground and begun lifting material into its column. At 5:09 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a tornado warning for Jasper County. In technical language, the warning specified a large and extremely dangerous tornado, located several miles west of Joplin and moving east-northeast at close to 40 miles per hour. Time to impact estimates placed the circulation within the city's primary grid in roughly 10 to 15 minutes. Sirens activated across the municipal area, tones cycling for 3 minutes. Emergency broadcast systems carried the same message. Confirmed tornado, immediate shelter recommended. The information traveled quickly through designed channels. Weather radios triggered automatically. Local television interrupted programming. Mobile alerts reached enabled devices. Cellular networks registered sharp increases in call volume. Some users experienced delays, first signs of congestion. Traffic patterns shifted without coordination. Some drivers accelerated, attempting to clear the threat zone. Others slowed or pulled to the side, uncertain whether to continue. Signals still operated normally. Movement remained a collection of individual decisions, not a system-level response. The storm itself strengthened. The wall cloud lowered further. The tornado, initially obscured by rain and distance, condensed into a gray column embedded within the precipitation shield. Its circulation tightened, forward flank downdrafts feeding inflow along the surface. The debris signature on radar intensified, confirming continued ground contact and increasing interaction with built structures. Power fluctuations began at towers near the storm's path. Some cellular sites briefly dropped from network maps before reconnecting on backup power. As the tornado approached the urban boundary, environmental cues sharpened. Visibility dropped below 1 mile, then below half a mile, as rain intensity rose and debris began entering the air column ahead of the main circulation. Wind speeds at ground level became variable, gusts exceeding 45 miles per hour in some locations, calmer pockets in others, a pattern consistent with complex inflow surrounding a strong vortex. Doors became harder to open or close as pressure gradients increased. Unsealed windows flexed subtly in their frames. The tornado crossed Highway 71 southwest of the main grid, its path width expanding toward 3/4 of a mile. Within that width, the core circulation, 200 yards across at maximum intensity, contained wind speeds estimated well over 200 miles per hour. Around that core, concentric damage bands extended outward, a zone of total destruction surrounded by zones of severe and then moderate damage. The forward speed of the storm, around 40 miles per hour, meant that each city block within the central band would experience the full wind field for durations between 15 and 60 seconds. Inside Joplin, the warning dissemination system continued to operate as designed. Sirens completed their cycles. Broadcasts repeated the message. Weather radios remained active. But the translation from data to behavior remained uneven. Some commercial locations initiated partial protocols, moving employees and customers toward interior spaces away from windows. Others maintained near-normal operations. The hospital system began moving some patients into interior corridors but did not implement full lockdown across all departments. Residential responses varied in similar ways. Some households moved to basements or interior rooms, while others stayed in living spaces, monitoring conditions through windows or television. As the circulation neared the southwestern residential sector, the storm's physical presence became less abstract. The wall cloud, now fully formed, appeared as a dark, rotating mass. The tornado column beneath it blended with rain and debris, a dense, moving opacity rather than a sharply defined funnel. Its position had closed to approximately 2 miles from the city center. Radar products at the Springfield office showed the debris ball intensifying. Reflectivity values above 50 decibels Z directly collocated with the velocity maxima, a classic signal of a violent tornado in a populated area. At 5:38 p.m., the tornado entered the southwestern edge of Joplin's residential grid. From that point forward, its motion converted atmospheric energy into mechanical damage on a large scale. Roof systems detached in rapid succession. Frame connections failed as pressure equalized between interior and exterior environments. Structures encountered the wind field not as a single gust, but as a sequence: outer circulation, core, and trailing flow, each with different load patterns. For many houses, failure began at roof-to-wall connections. Once those connections broke, walls lost bracing and collapsed outward, leaving foundation slabs exposed. Light quality shifted into the greenish-gray often reported in severe hailstorms, but here the tint combined with suspended insulation, dust, and rain, reducing contrast and depth perception. Objects lost defined edges. Scale and distance became difficult to judge. Orientation cues degraded as landmarks blurred or disappeared behind advancing precipitation and debris. The familiar grid of streets, houses, and trees began transitioning into a continuous, indistinct field. Sound concentrated into a broad-spectrum roar, but its dominant energy lay at low frequencies. Windows and walls vibrated in response to pressure waves. The storm's subsonic component propagated through the ground and structures, making the tornado's presence physically palpable, even in locations that still had partial visual obscuration. Human voice communication became ineffective outdoors within the damage corridor. Signals of warning or direction could not compete with the composite noise of wind and impact. Power infrastructure failed in sequence as the circulation advanced. High-voltage transmission towers along the path twisted and buckled at their bases, collapsing and pulling down spans of line with them. Distribution poles snapped at ground line, crossarms and transformers breaking free under load. Circuits isolated automatically where protective relays detected faults, producing sudden, simultaneous darkness in entire neighborhoods. Streetlights extinguished. Traffic signals lost power. Wherever emergency lighting existed, it activated, forming isolated pockets of illumination in an expanding dark zone. Water and natural gas systems began their own failure cycles. Fire hydrants sheared near ground level as vehicles or debris struck them, or as the underlying lines experienced directional stress from shifting soil and structure movement. Water mains at depth often remained intact initially but lost connection with the surface network. Pressure in affected zones dropped toward zero. Natural gas service lines separated at meter sets or where structures were removed from foundations. Some automatic shutoff valves triggered correctly, isolating sections. Others did not, leaving active leaks within debris fields. The tornado's outer circulation reached St. John's Regional Medical Center, Joplin's primary trauma facility, before the Corps arrived. Wind speeds at that radius, estimated between 80 and 100 miles per hour, drove rain and debris into the building's western face. Windows failed across multiple floors. Roofing materials began to peel. Mechanical equipment on the roof shifted or detached. Interior spaces near the perimeter transitioned from controlled hospital environment to direct exposure, while interior corridors still retained partial protection. Within the main commercial corridors, including Range Line Road, the tornado encountered large footprint structures built with steel frames, metal panel walls, and wide-span roofs. Facilities such as big box retail stores and strip malls failed progressively. Once portions of a roof lifted, internal pressure increased, accelerating wall failure. Frames twisted under unbalanced loads. Inventory, lumber, appliances, merchandise joined the debris stream, traveling at wind speeds and contributing to impact forces downwind. Vehicles in the path experienced aerodynamic forces beyond their design limits. Cars and light trucks rolled, slid, or lifted. Some traveled hundreds of feet from initial positions. Tractor-trailers on Interstate 44 jackknifed or overturned as the circulation crossed the highway, converting a functioning transport corridor into an obstructed debris field within seconds. Inside the tornado's core, wind speeds exceeded 200 miles per hour. Within this zone, structures did not simply lose components, they disintegrated. Wood framing fractured into short segments. Brick veneer stripped and became high-velocity projectiles. Interior contents, furniture, appliances, personal belongings, mixed into an airborne mass of heterogeneous material. Some debris ascended to altitudes near 15,000 feet, before descending miles downwind, distributing physical evidence of the path far beyond the immediate damage corridor. Multiple subvortices rotated within the main circulation, creating localized tracks of even more extreme damage. These nested vortices carved cycloidal patterns through debris fields, leaving arcs of foundation scouring and asymmetrical object displacement that would later be documented in post-event surveys. Within these bands, even heavily anchored structures experienced near total removal. As the tornado traversed the central urban area, it maintained continuous ground contact. The damage path remained unbroken across residential, commercial, and institutional zones. Width varied between half a mile and 3/4 of a mile, but within that band, the pattern of failure held: complete destruction in the inner corridor, severe structural compromise in adjacent zones, and decreasing but still significant damage further outward. At Joplin High School and surrounding facilities near 20th Street, roof systems collapsed, exterior walls failed, and vehicles in parking areas were displaced, overlapping one another or crushed under structural debris. Athletic fields, parking lots, and buildings that had defined a recognizable campus became a continuous surface of broken materials, with the underlying layout discernible only by position relative to undisturbed sectors at the edges. St. John's, now inside the core damage band, experienced catastrophic impact. Sections of exterior walls collapsed. Portions of upper floors opened directly to the exterior. Interior spaces flooded with wind-driven debris. Emergency generators continued operating, but distribution systems inside the building had sustained enough damage that functioning power was uneven, intermittent, or lost completely in some areas. The hospital's status transitioned from operational facility to compromised structure, unable to serve its intended regional role. Across the corridor, infrastructure designed to support a functioning city, roads, utilities, communications, institutional buildings, shifted from active systems to static debris in less than 15 minutes. The tornado's forward motion, approximately 40 miles per hour, carried it through the entire urban grid in about 13 minutes of continuous ground contact. During that interval, the combination of extreme wind speed, pressure differentials, debris loading, and multiple vortices systematically removed or disabled the core of Joplin's built environment. At the northeastern edge of the city, the circulation began to lift. Ground contact weakened, then ceased. Radar signatures showed the debris ball shrinking, hook echo loosening, mesocyclone structure decaying as the storm moved away. On the ground, the acoustic environment shifted almost immediately. The dominant, low-frequency roar stopped. Wind reduced to background levels. In the space where the tornado had passed, sound became absence. No traffic flow, no continuous electrical hum, only occasional impacts from falling unstable debris and isolated voices. Light returned through thinning cloud cover, revealing an urban area whose central geometry no longer matched any available map. Where the three-dimensional grid of Joplin's core had existed minutes earlier, there now lay a corridor of altered terrain, foundations, fragmented materials, and discontinuous fragments of infrastructure, extending for miles along the tornado's path. The storm moved on. The city remained in place, but its center no longer existed in the form that morning systems had assumed. When the circulation lifted beyond the northeastern edge of the grid, the city existed in two distinct states: areas outside the corridor where power remained, structures stood, and normal spatial orientation still applied, and a central zone where the built environment had been mechanically removed. Darkness entered this zone early, not from sunset, but from the absence of electrical infrastructure. Streetlights, traffic signals, commercial signage, residential lighting, all had been eliminated across several square miles. Only isolated generators at critical facilities produced localized points of illumination. Emergency response began at the periphery. Fire units from surrounding jurisdictions converged on Joplin, but major roads were impassable. Range Line Road no longer functioned as a transportation corridor. Interstate 44 held overturned vehicles, debris, and downed transmission infrastructure. Responders abandoned vehicles when blockage became total and moved on foot through debris fields, carrying equipment manually. Navigation relied on memory rather than landmarks. Intersections, signage, building profiles, all had been removed or rendered unrecognizable. Communication systems had developed a void aligned precisely with the damage path. Cellular towers within the corridor had collapsed or lost backhaul connectivity. Survivors inside the zone attempting to contact family, emergency services, or neighbors encountered no signal. Landline networks were severed. Internet infrastructure was non-functional. Emergency radio systems lacked repeater coverage where towers had been destroyed. Incoming calls to the 911 center increased sharply, but dispatchers could not reach units operating inside the destroyed area. Coordination degraded into isolated, independent efforts. Water distribution showed system-wide failure within the corridor. Hydrants were inoperable. Mains at depth remained intact in some locations but disconnected from surface points. Fire suppression capability was limited to areas outside the path. Natural gas lines continued leaking at multiple rupture points until utility crews reached valve stations and executed manual shutoffs. Gas odors were detectable over wide sections of the debris field. Medical capacity shifted instantly from regional sufficiency to deficit. St. John's Regional Medical Center had lost structural integrity across multiple floors and could not continue functioning as a trauma facility. Freeman Hospital maintained operation but experienced immediate surge beyond design limit. Triage areas expanded into corridors and parking lots. Ambulances transported patients to hospitals in surrounding cities, Carthage, Pittsburgh, Springfield, without centralized tracking. Some patients arrived by private vehicles, others carried manually from debris sites. Search and rescue operations began without unified command. Personnel, firefighters, police, volunteers, moved into the affected zone using improvised routes. Street grids no longer provided reliable orientation. Debris fields covered roadways, and remaining structures lacked identifying features. Survivors emerging from basements, interior rooms, or commercial storage spaces attempted to navigate through altered terrain, often unable to reach familiar destinations. Many remained near initial shelter locations, waiting for daylight. The debris field showed directional patterns consistent with the storm's movement. Materials originating in southwestern sectors lay distributed northeast across multiple blocks. Personal documents, photographs, and lightweight belongings traveled miles downwind, scattered into rural areas outside the city. Vehicles rested in irregular configurations, some stacked, some inverted, some wrapped around structural remnants. Foundation slabs marked positions of former residences. Brick, wood, metal, and vegetation blended into continuous layers of fragmented material. Fire ignitions increased where natural gas continued flowing. Responders marked burning structures and prioritized life safety over suppression. Water pressure was insufficient for large-scale firefighting. Smoke rose from scattered points throughout the corridor, visible even in low light. Rain from trailing storms fell over the area, complicating movement and soaking exposed debris and survivors. Missing persons reports accumulated immediately. Family members arrived at police stations and functioning hospitals seeking information. No centralized registry existed. Officers recorded names manually without ability to verify status or location. Data remained fragmented across multiple agencies, handwritten logs, and verbal reports. Aerial observation provided the first coherent image of the scope. Media helicopters, arriving from metropolitan areas, transmitted footage showing a linear corridor cleared through the urban grid. A continuous scar extending more than 6 miles. The absence of visible lighting confirmed the boundary of the destruction zone. From altitude, the spatial extent became clear. On the ground, conditions remained incomprehensible to those moving through debris. Power restoration began in sectors outside the corridor. Some neighborhoods regained electricity within hours. Inside the path, no restoration was possible without reconstruction of physical infrastructure. Poles, transformers, conductors, substations, all destroyed. Utility crews established perimeter assessment zones but could not enter interior areas until debris clearance began. Mapping systems lost reliability. Navigation applications displayed streets that no longer existed in functional form. Addresses were non-operational. House numbers had been removed along with structures, and commercial footprints no longer matched map overlays. Responders used directional references based on pre-event knowledge rather than physical markers. As night advanced, the contrast sharpened. Neighborhoods beyond the corridor showed typical evening lighting. The damage zone remained a continuous expanse of darkness broken only by generator-powered lights, vehicle headlights, and fires. The absence of electrical sound created a static silence, punctuated by isolated rescue activity, shifting debris, and the movement of responders. By the end of the night, initial casualty estimates existed but remained incomplete. Injured individuals numbered beyond the capacity of local medical systems. Fatalities increased as responders reached previously inaccessible areas. Structural destruction across the corridor included thousands of residential units, commercial buildings, institutional facilities, and critical infrastructure. The city's central systems, power, water, gas, communications, registered as non-functional across the entire path. The day concluded without resolution, only transition, from the impact phase to the beginning of sustained emergency operations. The built environment that had defined Central Joplin on Sunday morning no longer existed in operational form. What remained was a corridor of altered terrain and a system of response attempting to reestablish order where the physical framework had been removed.